Hi, I'm Elliot, and today I'm going to be reviewing every book that I read in 2025, which ended up being 52, which was my goal for the year. That's one book a week. I'm pretty proud of that. So yeah, I just kind of want to dive right in. I am a classical Greek philologist, so a lot of these are around ancient Greece and whatnot. So if that's not your thing, I will not be offended. Don't feel the need to stay and watch this if it's not your cup of tea. That being said, I'd like to start with the first book I read back in January of 2025, which was Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. This is obviously a rebind that I did myself before I knew how to put words on the book. So that's great. Anyhow, I loved this book. It was very visceral and raw. It's about this college student who's sort of having to come back into the life of his dead best friend and sort of pick up the pieces and also sort of solve this mystery that's been following the both of them. Really interesting, really great book. I love Lee Mandello. This was my first book of his that I read, but I really enjoy his work. The next book is Giovanni's Room, which I believe I donated. So I'm just gonna put the cover up on the screen. Giovanni's Room is strikingly reminiscent of the culture that housed it, meaning the time period, the culture around queerness, everything like that. It's pedantic and it's apathetic and it's genius. It's an incredible, incredible novel, heartbreaking, but necessary. My next book was Rape by Sarah Rose Etter. So I'm from San Francisco. This book is set in San Francisco, and I love that it pairs the dramatic sort of idiocy of San Francisco with this raw emotional journey of the main character leaving behind everything that she's ever known and becoming a completely new person. I liked it. It was not my favorite read of the year, but I did really enjoy it. The next book I got from the library, so I'm gonna put a photo up on the screen again. The next one was All's Well by Mona Awad. I love Mona Awad. She's one of my favorite authors of the 21st century. She's so brilliant, and she does this thing where every time that she writes a novel, she makes these incredibly complex inner worlds, and they just leave you incredibly baffled. And the plot twists, they twist a lot. She's a genius. I just adore her. My favorite, I read last year, but my favorite of hers has to be Rouge. That was her newest novel, but before I Love You, Bunny, which was also quite good, and I read this year, and we'll talk about that one later. My next book was The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore, which has a really lovely cover, and I think that's the reason I read it, is because of how beautiful the cover is. Because it was not my favorite read of the year. It was a very style over substance type of book, which I think that style absolutely has a place in literature. That's a huge part of literature, but I do think that it needs to be paired with something else, like what Donna Tartt says in The Secret History about beauty becoming quite superficial unless it's paired to something that's with more depth to it. And it did have some depth to the book, don't get me wrong, but it was definitely it felt to me like the author was prioritizing the vibes, the medieval peasant type of energy over telling a story with like a moral to it, if that makes sense. Okay, so my next book was like a 3-in-1. It was The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, but the Penguin Classics version of it has like all three in like a teeny tiny little novel setup. I don't have much to say that hasn't been said before about Poe. We can talk him into the ground. Obviously, he's an incredible writer. The Telltale Heart is, of course, a classic for a reason. It is so just like such a simple and effective story. Just one of those, it'll be traumatizing middle school English students for years to come. Great author. Okay, my next one also came from the library. This was Piglet by Lottie Hazel. Not sure how you say that. This was really lovely as well. This was also about the having of a body and more about like obviously like the consuming and the dangers of living performatively to a degree. Obviously it's a very gluttonous novel. I'm sure you could glean that if you've never even heard anything about it just from the name. But this was a really great, I love having complex main female characters. I think that we don't see nearly enough of that as we should. That's a theme in a lot of my favorite books, is complex female characters. I just think that there's so much to womanhood and to the what comes along with that, and the body horror that is womanhood, that I just think isn't explored enough. But that's a discussion for another time, of course. My next book was The Swimming Pool Library by Alan Hollinghurst. I thought this was going to be sort of a social commentary on life during the AIDS crisis, and what that was like for queer folk, for everybody around that, what it was like, you know, to be a gay person having to struggle with this culture and also continue like having a sexuality during this time. I just thought it would be more of an exploration of those themes, and it turned out to be a lot more of just sort of empty sex, which is not really my vibe. Again, I like something with substance that I can think about forever and ever with a book, and this just didn't do it for me. If I'm honest, I was expecting a lot of more angst, a lot of gay angst in this book, and I did not get that. Sad. After that, I read Brideshead Revisited. I am, I think, the biggest Saltburn fan in the world. This is Saltburn here. I've got a Saltburn tattoo that I'm really, really bad at showing off because it's behind my ear. I doubt I just showed it to you, so if not, I'll put a photo on the screen. But so Brideshead Revisited is the novel. It's an Evelyn Waugh novel. They talk about Waugh in the movie, and this is what inspired the plot. And it was definitely, you could tell that it was written in the time period that it was written in, but I kind of like that. I think they paired really well together, the rich people misbehaving plot alongside the drama of the 1800s. I'm pretty sure it's the 1800s, don't quote me on that, but goddamn, I really liked it. I really liked it, and I would recommend it. My next book is Brutes by Diz Tate. This is a really lovely examination of girlhood, but more on the younger girlhood side, which I feel isn't examined enough in the adult literature. I mean, obviously you see a lot of teenage characters in teenage books, but I want to think about my teenage years through an adult lens, which I feel like is not done enough, and this did a really good job of doing that. These girls are all really fucked up, and it's really interesting. It's incredibly intense, and like I said before about a different book, I can't remember which one, but it's also visceral and it's also raw. And yeah, it just does a really, really good job of examining the side of girlhood that the media generally doesn't think about. Okay, this is another one I got from the library, but The Vegetarian by Hong Kang. Fantastic. Obviously, everybody talks about their love for The Vegetarian. It was nominated for a bunch of awards for good freaking reason. It's a pervasive and perverted allegory for women's sufferings in a patriarchal society. It's unnerving as hell, but it's brilliant. It's fantastic. Another incredibly complex female main character. Okay, then I did another Lee Mandela book, who wrote Summer Sons, which I talked about earlier. I read Feed Them Silence, which was a relatively short story that I picked up from the library, but it was really good. It was odd and discursive, but it was sort of a look into the mind of an obsessive, which obviously I am an obsessive. I'm a classicist. I am, in the words of Donna Tartt, nothing in my soul if not obsessive, because the mind of a classicist is pedantic and, how does she put it, unrelenting. Anyhow, I love looking into obsession. The way that Lee writes is, it's romantic almost, in a way that I find very beautiful and refreshing. He writes, the book is about a wolf to a degree, and he writes about this wolf as though he's like in love with the wolf, and it's really interesting. You don't get that very often. I like that guy. After that, I read my GOAT, The Secret History. I've got a copy right here that I'm not digging out, but all my other copies are at school. I've got like, I think 6 copies at school. I love that book so dearly. This was, I think, my 6th reread. I'm about to reread it in Italian, which I'm really excited for. Dio di Illusioni is the name in Italian for some reason, God of Illusions. Anyways, obviously, I love The Secret History. My entire life can be traced back to that book. And what's really interesting about that book for me personally is that I started my journey with classics and everything years before I read The Secret History. I read The Goldfinch, her most recent novel, when I was way too young. I think I was 13 when I first read The Goldfinch, and it changed the course of my life. I became super obsessed with Donna Tartt, but for some reason I waited until I was much older to read The Secret History, which was probably a good thing. Otherwise, I probably would have been murdering my friends in the woods. Following my GOAT of a book, I read Night Shift. Hi, Editing Elliot here. I'm not sure if Night Shift is supposed to be named after the Lucy Dacus song or if that's just a coincidence, but I think it might be, like, on purpose. Was a lesbian story, but it felt to me like if a straight man tried to write a lesbian story, like it very felt like a straight person's perception of queer people rather than an actual representation of queer people. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't my favorite, and I just really don't have much to say about it. After that, I read Boy Parts. This is obviously a binding I did myself, and if you like my bindings, I sell them on Etsy. I'll link it in the description. I also do my art. I also sell art if you're into art. Anyways, Boy Parts. I adore Eliza Clark, my GOAT. This book is so fucking good. I think this was the 3rd book of hers that I read, which is crazy because it's my favorite by far. I love, as we've discussed, I love a complex female main character. I love a woman who's a little bit evil. I love a woman who treats men poorly in fiction. Kind of in real life too. But goddamn, this book is so good. I will always recommend this as, like, this is one of my go-to recommendations because I think that everybody should read it. It's about a photographer, 20-something woman, and she is just like fucking flying off the handle. I love this book so dearly. Highly recommend, obviously. After that, I think this one I also got from the library. So here's a photo of the cover. I read The Princess of 72nd Street. I really liked this one. I read it on the airplane to Rome, so I wasn't like super locked in, but it was really good. It was a observation of bipolar disorder in women, but it was told through a very sort of fictional lens, which I really appreciated. And I thought it was a really interesting way to tell that type of story of mental health and everything, because usually when you see mental health books, I mean, usually they're like self-help books and everything, but this is just like such an interesting way to portray the feeling to someone who's maybe never felt the feelings that bipolar disorder, you know, gives a person. And I think that we should do more of that too. It was awesome. I liked it. This one I also read on the airplane to Rome. It was a long flight. I had a lot of time. But this is If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. I really liked this one too. Again, it was the plane to Rome, so I wasn't super locked in. It was a really interesting way to tell this story. And I don't want to like say too much because I fear I'll spoil it. But if you want to read something that you've never read before and will never read again, recommend. I think I had this book at school. I would not have sold it. Okay, this book is sitting in my apartment at school, but it's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So since I was living in Rome for the summer, I had to get into the vibe of Rome, of course. So it felt like a good time to read the Meditations because I for somehow had never read them before. and I read like 80% of it during my lunch break at the Vatican Museum, which was goated already. I had a really, really fun time reading it. This thing is closer to the Bible for me than any religious text. I mean, it's like the one line from the Holdovers.
For my money, it's like the Bible, the Quran, and the Bhagavad Gita all rolled up into one. And the best part is not one mention of God.
That's exactly how I feel about the Meditations. And I think that people take Stoicism a lot out of context. And I think that reading this book really puts Stoicism into its original context, which was a much more reasonable practice than what a lot of people today have sort of morphed it into. I love Marcus Aurelius. That's my guy. Hey, okay, this one I read in Greece. Circe. I dipped it in the ocean in Greece. It's a little waterlogged. I am not the hugest fan of the Greek retellings. I would rather just read the originals. I did love the Song of Achilles. Of course, it's hard not to love that book, but I also understand that retellings are stripping away a lot of the context of the originals that is really important to understanding the ancient world, and they're fun for entertainment, but I just feel like people use them as learning in a place where they shouldn't be used as learning, because a lot of these people are taking creative liberties. Anyways, enough about that. Circe itself was an okay book. Circe is a really interesting character, obviously, and I just don't think that Madeline Miller really gave her the respect in this telling that she deserves. She's incredibly complex, and there's like a subtlety to her that I fear was lost in Circe. So honestly, just read the original source materials. For any retelling, just read the source material. The source material's awesome! I don't know why people don't read them, but do it. In the same vein, and also in Greece, I read the Penelopiad, which I feel similarly about. Penelope is this incredibly influential figure for the ancient world. I mean, she shaped female culture. Like, she's the reason that weaving was so huge with women in ancient Greece. She's held as this like perfect example of femininity in the ancient world, and I think that people forget that she is the blueprint of what a woman should look like. And it was kind of, don't kill me, it was kind of boring, and she's so interesting, and she deserves if she's gonna have a retelling about her, it needs to be treated with the respect that she deserves. I'm like rage baiting myself about this book. We're about to read this again in my, I'm taking a class this semester on classical Greek myth, and we're gonna read the Penelopiad for God knows why. My professor already knows where I stand about the Penelopiad, and he finds it quite amusing. My position may change as I spend more time digging into it, but for now, that's not my favorite. Then I got to move on to another Eliza Clark. She's Always Hungry. This was a collection of short stories, and Eliza Clark is also really good at the suspension of disbelief, like sort of fantastical in a way. They're not really fantasy, but they do require some suspension of disbelief is what I mean by that. And she does really well with like the plot twists and just these insane fucking stories. I loved it. It's so unsettling. I particularly liked the story Hollow Bones. This was my favorite of the short stories. After that, this was another library find. I read Perfection, which was also mostly vibes. Pretty much nothing happened, and I keep seeing it like front and center in different Barnes and Nobles, and even Feltrinelli's in Italy, they had it front and center. Why? Like, I don't mean to be a hater. I feel like a hater when I'm giving all these negative reviews, but nothing happened. It's about a couple and their life in Germany, but that's kind of it. There's no plot. There's no climax to the story. There's no, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? It's okay though, because I got to cleanse my palate by reading Emily Wilson's translation of the Iliad. That's my girl. I think it's really difficult to be a classicist right now and not be obsessed with Emily Wilson. This woman is a genius. I love her translation. Even the first line, she has easily the best translation of the first line. Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus. Like, that is goated. Goated. There's a video from, I think, the International Poetry Forum, something like that. A video of her reciting the proem of the Iliad in the original ancient Greek. In this video, you can really hear the dactylic hexameter, which is the one long, two short. She's a freaking genius, and she's such like a nerd woman, and there's not enough women in classics, not even nearly enough women in classics. And so I just think it's really, she's a genius, first of all, and also it's really great for the younger women in classics, such as myself, to have someone as awesome and cool and genius as her to look up to in our classics journeys. I think that's really special, and it was just a really good book. I love the Iliad, of course. It's my life's calling. After that, I read Wound, which was mediocre. Not much of anything happened in that one. This was another one that I bought because of the beautiful cover art, and it was beautiful, and it looks great on my shelf, and it was not my favorite. So the next book I read was Ender's Game, and this is because, there's two people in my school's classics program, just two. It's me and one other guy, and this guy had read The Secret History because I had obviously recommended it to him, and so when he recommended Ender's Game to me, said it was his favorite book, I felt the need to read it because he read mine, so you know, all's fair. And Ender's Game, of course, is a kid's book, so it was not my cup of tea in that way, but also it felt very much like military propaganda in a way. It felt very unrealistic. The main character is 6 when he starts battling like interdimensional evils. So maybe I'm not the target audience, but it was not my favorite. After that, I read the complete poems of Sappho. My girl, I just adore Sappho, of course. I'm a freaking queer woman in classics. Of course I love Sappho. I've got a line of hers on my computer. I would give it a read. It's easy poetry. Like it's easy to understand. It's not like Sylvia Plath. I once had a friend tell me that when reading Sylvia Plath, they felt like they actually had to think about it, and I went, well, yeah, what the fuck do you think? What? But you have to think less about the Sappho poems, which can be fun. After that, I read Paradise Rot, which was a short story that I, to be frank, don't remember at all. So clearly it didn't make much of an impression. So that was that. After that, I read Zero Sum by Joyce Carol Oates, which was also a collection of short stories, which is really odd for me. I never read short stories, so the fact that I've done 2 in like a couple of months was weird, but it was beautiful. It was gluttonous and visceral and beautiful, this collection of short stories, and they're all sort of woven together by a common theme of obsession, which we talked about. I love stories of obsession because that's me. I'm an obsessive. Yeah, I just thought it was really, really great. Okay, after that, I read The Oresteia, which is 3 plays written by Aeschylus, who was an ancient Greek tragedian, obviously. And these, Agamemnon specifically, that's the first one. These might be my favorite tragedies from the ancient world, which is saying something because I love them all. But Clytemnestra is, I think, my favorite character from the ancient world. She's a complex female main character, and she, spoiler alert, kills her husband, Agamemnon. Happens right in the first book, not much of a spoiler. But she's so fucking cool, goddamn. And the whole trilogy just has just these incredible themes of justice and morality and what's right versus what's wrong, and these sort of circles of violence that if you enforce violence with violence, then more violence will happen. And then the theme, there's a theme in like the third of the plays, which is Eumenides, I believe. But that play really holds sort of the seeds of a justice system, like they're almost in court, which is really interesting. And they bring on Athena as an example of a character who never had a mother figure. Because it's true, she never had a mother figure. So Orestes sort of appeals to her. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a really good trilogy, and I would recommend giving it a read or a watch, or however you like to consume your plays. After that, I read Plato's Symposium. This is not the Symposium, this is just a different Platonian dialogue, but I'm holding it up for dramatic effect. I love Plato, clearly, and I think the Symposium is my favorite work of his. It's just not what people expect when they, like, the average person has a certain amount of knowledge about ancient Greece that they've picked up from the world around them usually, right? And the Symposium is just, it sort of goes against everything that the average person knows about the ancient world. And they talk a lot about sex is like a huge theme, about love, about soulmates. They talk about Achilles and Patroclus' sex life. Like, it's all. And this semester I was working with Athenian pottery, so I got to hold an entire set of Athenian Symposium ware, which was the coolest freaking thing ever. I really love that. Okay, after the Symposium, I read Herodotus, which is either called The Histories or On the War for Greek Freedom, and it's about the Persian Wars, and it's his sort of documentation. He goes through and he's supposed to be the first historian. People argue about what's real and what's exaggerated, but a lot of it he was getting from real sources, which is sort of the first time that we see that in the ancient world. And it's really interesting. He tells a lot of very entertaining stories that, you know, we're unsure of how true these stories are, but it's definitely worth a read, especially if you're into the Persian Wars, which, like, how can you not be into the Persian Wars, especially when they have two of the coolest battles in all of history, the Battle of Thermopylae and the Battle of Marathon. Like, get the fuck out. Goated. Okay, back to normal fiction novels. After Herodotus, I read Hungerstone, which was a modern retelling of Carmilla, which inspired Dracula. It's a sapphic vampire story, Carmilla. And as we discussed earlier, I'm not usually the biggest fan of retellings, but I did love Hungerstone. It's rare to find a truly great retelling of a classic, but this one is handled with such subtlety and finesse and perfection that I couldn't help but love it. You know what I mean? The author allows the plot to exist on its own without the homophobic overtones of the original, and she sort of breathes a new life into the characters and the plot and everything, and it's just so beautifully done. I was blown away, just astounded. After Hungerstone, I read the Theban plays, which are technically not a trilogy, but all do go together. They're by Sophocles. Yes, okay, so Oedipus is really fascinating. Of course, I'm sure you've heard of an Oedipus complex, or if you're in classics or have a bit of knowledge, maybe you've read it, maybe you know him as the guy that killed his dad and married his mom, which he did do, but it's not his fault. It's a very interesting. Sophocles was very fascinated by the idea of the steps that you take to try and avoid your fate are the very steps that lead you to it. A sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, which is such a fascinating thing to think about. And Oedipus is one of the most perfect self-fulfilling prophecy examples that exists. And it goes over the top with how excessively tragic it is, but it's kind of perfect. And Antigone is, of course, the crown jewel of the collection. Antigone is probably a perfect play. If you don't know anything about it, or read it, watch it, however you consume your plays, please. Antigone is so good. And Oedipus at Colonus is even probably my favorite out of the three, because it sort of examines this quiet grief and it's way in the future, so they're sort of examining how the actions of Oedipus and everything that followed, how it weighs on him and his family, and the sort of impacts that it's had on everybody around there. And Theseus shows up, which is really interesting. I love when Theseus shows up, because what are you doing here? But yeah, no, I would highly recommend all 3 of the Theban plays to anyone who's interested in this kind of bullshit. After that, I read We Love You Bunny, which was the newest Mona Awad. I read Bunny last year, and We Love You Bunny was not as good as the first one in my opinion, but it is still Mona Awad and she is still a genius. And it was really good. I read it in like a day and it's like 600 pages because I wanted to send it in the mail to my mom, and she still hasn't read it. Mom, if you're watching this, go read your book. But yeah, she's the queen of surrealist literature in my humble opinion, and she maintains that with this book, and I fear I can't say any of the plot without giving away both this one and the first one, so I'm just gonna move on to the next one. Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast by Oscar Wilde. I am a big Wilde head. I love Oscar Wilde. I went as him for Halloween this year. That's my goat. This is like a quote book. This, just like the Meditations, it's closer to my Bible than any actual religious text ever has been. He's so snarky and like dramatic. I think my favorite quote from the collection is, "I don't like Switzerland. It has produced nothing but theologians and waiters." He's such a sassy pants. And it's one of the teeny tiny penguin classics, so you can knock it out in an afternoon. Great book. Highly recommend. After that, I got really into Euripides. I read all of them in a row. So I started with Medea because, of course, I love Clytemnestra, so of course I also love Medea. She's slightly less valid in her actions than Clytemnestra is, but she's still somewhat valid. And it's an interesting look at what it meant to be a woman in ancient Greece and how much of that was property of your husband, no matter how awful that husband ended up being. After that, I read The Bacchae, which I also really loved. The Bacchae are the female worshippers of Dionysus, and in this play, they are fucked up. It is great. I'm having a hard time thinking of how to explain the plots of these without totally spoiling the whole thing, so I think that one I'm just gonna leave alone and let you figure it out on your own if you do want to read The Bacchae, because it is a great one. And after that, I read Heracles, which is another Euripidean beautiful, beautiful one. Theseus is a main character in this one. Hilarious. What the fuck are you doing from here? But it does have one of the most goated lines from all of ancient Greece. I love the, "I fear to stain your clothes with blood. Stain them. I don't care." Yeah. Because why is Heracles in love with Theseus? Hello? Hi, Editing Elliot again. There's a similar quote on like Pinterest in the same format, and it says, and it's, I believe, Pilates says, "I'll take care of you." Orestes says, "It's rotten work." Sorry, ignore that. And Pilates says, "Not to me, not if it's you." And that's from Euripides' version of Orestes, which I talked about earlier. Obviously, Heracles was the inspiration for Disney's Hercules, but Heracles, the original, is so fucked up. So fucked up. It's fantastic. Highly recommend. And in a similar vein, Hippolytus is one of my favorites from Euripides, oddly enough. It shows like the sort of negative side of the gods that the plays only sometimes talk about, and it was actually so negative towards the gods that Euripides was pretty frequently accused of being an atheist. And this one is Aphrodite in particular, who curses Hippolytus's, so she gets mad that Hippolytus isn't properly worshiping her because he's decided that he's going to never have sex. He's going to be a perpetual virgin, right? He's gonna be celibate is what I was looking for. And she doesn't care for that, obviously. She's the goddess of sex. So she curses Hippolytus's like stepmom to be in love with him. Really fucked up. Really great, really fucked up. It gets so much more fucked up than that, but beautiful, genius, incredible. My last Euripides one was The Trojan Women, which was not my favorite because of how excessively tragic it is, and it's another one where I fear I can't really say anything about the plot without giving it away, so I'm just gonna move on to Thucydides with the history of the Peloponnesian War. This one's interesting for a lot of reasons. Thucydides is regarded as the first scientific historian, whereas Herodotus was just the first historian. So Thucydides doesn't really make things up as much as Herodotus does. Thucydides, he like gathers sources and stuff like that, which is new at this point in time. Like, this hasn't really happened in the ancient world before. And another thing that's interesting about the history of the Peloponnesian War written by Thucydides is that it's told from the side of the loser in the war. Spoiler alert, Athens loses the Peloponnesian Wars. And there's this quote that you may have heard, that the history is always told by the victors. And this is just like a really interesting situation where that's not true. And I think a part of that is the fact that Sparta was not writing things the same way, because they didn't sort of value literature, obviously, in the way that Athens did. And so it's just really, it's really interesting. And of course, the freaking Peloponnesian Wars are fascinating. I think about the walls and the plague constantly. But it is incredibly dense. So if you're not into ancient Greece, I would skip that one. And we're coming up on the end here. I've only got 2 more books that I read this year. So the first was The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus. If I had to choose a philosophical school of thought to sort of identify with, I think I would probably choose absurdism. Every time I read Camus, I just feel very sort of seen by a lot of the things, obviously not everything he says, but a lot of the things he says. And in The Myth of Sisyphus, he explores free will, and he explores death and suicide and all these incredibly heavy topics, but sort of comes at it from an odd angle that it's not necessarily the end of the world. I mean, as you may know, the last line of The Myth of Sisyphus is, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy," which is a really unique, but I think fantastic take specifically on that myth. I mean, that's the last, there's a lot else in the book, but of course, that's the crown jewel. That's the pièce de résistance. After that, this is my last one of the year. I read Nymph by Stephanie LaCava, which is about a woman who's a Latin scholar, a sex worker, and also an assassin. Interesting mix of things. I really liked this one. It was a little bit hard to follow, but the plot twist at the end was fantastic. I'd give it like a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Just because I do love a woman in academia. It was really, maybe I'll give it 4 stars. I love a woman in academia. I love a complex woman. We know all that. So yeah, I mean, if you made it this far, thanks for watching me ramble about books for however many minutes. I hope that your 2026 is off to a great start. And if you want to check out my original paintings, I have them listed on my Etsy alongside a lot of other creative stuff. So if art is up your alley, I would love it if you would check that out. Thank you so much for watching, and I guess I'll see you next year when I make another one of these videos. Thanks so much for watching. Ciao, ciao. A domani.